Good evening, and whatever time zone you're in, good whatever. Tonight we're going to review Chapter 2 of the Foundation of Buddhist Practice, and we'll start with the motivation. And I just keep thinking about, I'm just really appreciative that when I first started going to Buddhist centers, both of them emphasize, I went to two places, and both emphasized learning the 10 non-virtues, the things that we need to abandon: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle talk, coveting, malicious intent, and wrong view. We spend a lot of our time learning about what to adopt and what to abandon, and we have to look at those and learn about those. And for me, that was very beneficial. It helped me resolve a lot of confusion that I had growing up in our society. And so as we review this chapter tonight, it's important to think, even though it can be kind of a wordy and heady chapter, it's actually boiling down to our own experience. And so knowing what to adopt and what to abandon, we have to figure this out, what that really means in our lives. And we do this experientially. We do this by learning, understanding the meaning of things, meditating, and we bring this all into our own experience. So that's a great fortune to have those teachings. They'll help us to avoid being born in lower rebirths, avoid harming others. We'll actually learn a lot about ourselves in the process, and maybe even get to a place where we take a genuine interest in others and learn how to get rid of our self-centered thoughts so that we can actually benefit others. So let's see what we're doing tonight is in that greater context of cleaning up our ethical conduct, learning about concentration and wisdom, so we can follow this path to full awakening, to benefit all that we meet, and may we have many karmic connections with all beings, all kinds of beings. So I thought this was the hardest chapter in the book, and I got kind of lost when we first went through this, so this was good for me. It's not so bad if you just keep reading it over and over. So basically, this chapter is about fulfilling our aims. What do we need to do to fulfill our aims? And is that possible? And so most religions are set up in a way where they want to accomplish certain goals. And in Buddhism, we talk about nirvana and full awakening, and we have to see if these things are really possible. So we have to actually be able to test the claims that are made, and we have to see if these are accurate and if they're non-deceptive. And we have to figure out what to practice and what to abandon in order to attain awakening. And we have to figure out what the heck is the ultimate nature of reality. We have to be able to discern that. So Dharmakirti said that since correct or reliable cognition is a prerequisite for achieving all human purposes, I shall explain it. So that's what this chapter is about. It's mostly about reliable cognizers, correct thinking, correct thought, correct cognition. And we'll get into that. And we need to understand this in relationship to meditation, because we have to know what kind of cognizer, what kind of mind we have going on in meditation. So, for example, if we figure out something about emptiness or something about subtle impermanence or something like that, we might have a correct assumption. And that's just kind of like nice, but we really need to know if we have a non-conceptual realization. So we need to know these different kind of cognizers. And as you will either recall this or maybe learn something new tonight, but mostly I think you'll be recalling things because as we go through this topic to see why why it's important. But mainly, one more general way to speak about this is we're always swimming upstream in Buddhism. We're always coming up against things that challenge the way we look at the world and even what we think about reality. So we're swimming upstream, and we need to have the right tools to do that. And what did the Buddha say to do? He said to take an analytical approach. He said, do not accept my Dharma merely out of respect for me, but analyze and check it. So this is what led to, in Buddhism, like fields of logic and epistemology, which is like how do you know things. And so that's because these are the tools. And so what we're actually trying to do when all is said and done is to ascertain with reliable cognizers. That's like have realizations that are with the correct kind of minds, cognizers and perceivers. What are we going to know? We're going to know different kind of objects, like what we talked about last week, the 4 seals or the 2 truths, things like that. Those are the things we need to be able to look at these objects and do, as the Buddha said, the way a goldsmith analyzes gold, by burning, cutting, and rubbing it. So what a goldsmith does back in the day, that way of seeing if it was fake gold or real gold or the quality of the gold, is they'd look for external impurities in the gold first by burning the gold. And these were kind of fairly evident flaws in the gold. And then to look for internal impurities, they'd cut the gold, and that helped them to see things that were slightly more obscure, different kind of faults in the gold. And then they did something where it says, the verse says rubbing, but it's some kind of filing process where they actually could figure out if there were very subtle impurities in the gold. So this is kind of similar to what we need to do in the sense of we need to look for these 3 kind of impurities regarding incorrect explanations. And what about evident phenomena, slightly obscure phenomena, and very obscure phenomena? That's the way we divide things up. That's really useful, and that's one of the main topics tonight. So what we're taught and what we need to really think through, and really, if you think about your own experience, it's not so hard to make sense of this. But we have to see if there are any incorrect explanations regarding these 3 kinds of phenomena. And if there aren't any incorrect explanations, then we can accept those. So regarding the teachings have described things that are evident, slightly obscure, and very obscure. And if they're correct, we can accept those teachings. But if we find things that are incorrect, then we're not going into the whole chapter because there's more than you could cover in one night, but there's more in there about how to figure some of those things out regarding that. But first, let's talk about these 3 categories. And these are described in relationship to sentient beings. And so this is where you need to pull out your little handout. And if you're online, there's a URL someplace, and pop it up and look at side 1 at the top. And we're going to do this together. Evident phenomena, slightly obscure phenomena, and very obscure phenomena. And for evident phenomena, there are 4 of these items that are related to it. So look at your little handout and see if you can figure out what those 4 are. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, you can call it out. Okay, Yeah, I do need a pen because I got to cross them off as we go. So who wants to start? Okay.
Ordinary beings easily perceive these objects.
Yes, ordinary beings easily perceive these objects for evident phenomena. That's G. Yeah, we see things with our eyes easily. So these are evident. Okay, what else? There's 3 more. Yes, Venerable Pende. Thank you. A. Okay, A includes external objects such as colors, sounds, odors, tastes, and tangible objects. Yes, those are evident phenomena. What else? Okay, Venerable Seppo. C. Yes, these are known by direct, reliable cognizers that correspond to our 5 physical senses. That's how we see evident phenomena. Go ahead. F, right. F includes internal objects such as feelings of happiness, pain, hopes, and desires known by the mental consciousness. So these are all evident phenomena. Is that confusing or is that clear? We're good. We've studied this a while. Okay, how about slightly obscure phenomena? This has 3. H. Examples for ordinary beings are subtle impermanence and emptiness. Why? This is the bonus point.
Because you can understand them through reasoning.
Because you understand them through reasoning, yes. And they are slightly obscure. You don't see them, you have to use reasoning. You don't hear them, whatever. Okay, what else? There's 2 more. E. Cannot initially be directly perceived. Yeah, right. Emptiness. What? You don't see emptiness? This is empty. I can see that's empty. Wrong kind of emptiness. Okay. All right. Don't play that word game on me. 1 more. Yes. D. Okay. Ordinary beings must initially know them by factual, inferential cognizers. Inferential, reliable cognizers based on valid, factual reasons. Right. Which a lot of times are syllogisms. We use syllogisms for those. Okay. Now we have very obscure phenomena. Only one left. Venerable Pende. B. Known by ordinary sentient beings by relying on inferential, reliable cognizers by authoritative testimony. The attestation, who can say that word, of someone who is authoritative in that field. Yeah, so we're going to talk about these more, but yes, very good. But let's go back to, flip your page 2, because I had to fit things on the pages. And let's just talk a little bit about these 3 types of phenomena known by a specific kind of reliable cognizer, just so we get this very clear, because this comes up again and again in this chapter. What kind of reliable cognizer knows evident phenomena? B, direct reliable cognizer. What kind of cognizer knows slightly obscure phenomena? C, the factual inferential cognizer. What kind of cognizer knows very obscure phenomena? A, the inferential reliable cognizer by authoritative testimony. Is everybody clear? Okay, we'll talk about those a little bit more, but you did very good. All right, so these are 3 categories of phenomena, and they are described in relationship to ordinary sentient beings. They're not described in relationship to Aryas. Why would that be? What do you think? Why would they not be described in terms of Aryas? Because we're saying that that slightly obscure phenomena are known, for example, by factual inferential cognizers. Why wouldn't that work for an Arya? Yes, because an Arya is having direct perception. They're realizing it directly. They're actually using an evident, that is an evident phenomena to an Arya. It's not a slightly obscure phenomena when they're in direct meditative, when they're having a non-conceptual meditative equipoise on emptiness. That is a direct, reliable cognizer, and that is an evident phenomena to them. So these 3 categories are described in relationship to ordinary beings. So for ordinary beings, the real emptiness is a slightly obscure phenomena, whereas for an Arya, it's a evident phenomena. In meditative equipoise, yes, right. So, and for Buddhas, there are no obscure objects; they are omniscient. So that's how they vary a little bit by the type of person. So let's do there's a reflection on page 20 that we're going to do an example with. I'm going to kind of talk through it. But you can think about this in terms of other things. There are a lot of really good exercises in this chapter, and we're going to review the basic information. This is a review. We're going to review the basic information. But then once we've reviewed this, maybe we'll be clearer on it. I certainly was. Then I would say, go back and do all the exercises because they're really good questions. So exercise on 20 was make examples of evident phenomena, slightly obscure, and very obscure phenomena that you already know. How did you come to understand them? What type of reliable cognizer was involved? And so as we just went through those, yes, direct reliable cognizers, our five senses in our mental consciousness are going to see things that are evident, and the factual inferential cognizers are going to be based on valid factual reasons. And then there's the inferential reliable cognizers by authoritative testimony, where we rely on somebody who's an authority in the field. But so let's apply this to a campfire. That's what she does in this chapter. And this is an example where ordinary beings, the same phenomena, the same object can be all three categories for different ordinary beings, depending on their situation. For example, you're sitting at a campfire, you're feeling the warmth, you're seeing the fire. For you, that is an evident phenomena. But then your friends are on the other side of a clump of trees, and all they see is smoke. And where there's smoke, there's fire. And they infer that behind those trees, there's smoke, so there must be a fire. They don't see it, it's not evident, they infer that. And then you get on your cell phone, and you call your friend in New York City, and you say, here I am at a campfire. And for them, that is a very obscure phenomena. They don't see it, they can't hear it, they can't feel it, they can't do anything with reasoning, the inference. They couldn't have, it just won't, it's not going to get there for them. They have to rely on you, the authoritative person who knows that you're sitting at a campfire, to know that. So for them to know the existence of that campfire, no amount of reasoning would prove that to them. So that's where you're just varying the situation, and ordinary beings could have one of these three. So some other examples are like, I was born at 11:20 on December 5th. I kind of don't remember that, to tell you the truth. But my mom told me that, and for her it was very evident. But for me, it's extremely hidden phenomena, obscure, a very obscure phenomena. I don't remember that at all. But I remember what she told me. So for that is another example where it depends according to the situation. I mean, I was even there. And then like another thing, like another example in the book is like all the various stars and planets in our universe. The details of those for us are very obscure. But if you were a little creature on those planets, it'd be evident. So according to your situation, these things, they change. But they're also, for one individual, you could go through and have this, all three of those regarding an object. For example, if we're an ordinary being and we haven't entered any of the meditative paths, for us, emptiness or subtle impermanence is a slightly obscure phenomena. But when we become an Arya, as we said, that could be an evident phenomena, because we'd have a yogic direct perceiver of it. So, yeah. And then another thing that's kind of interesting is to think about, when I look at you, I'm looking at Venerable Sultan right now, I see your body. For me, your body is an evident phenomena. But the fact that you have a heart is not an evident phenomena. That's something I infer, because all human beings have hearts. Therefore, you have a heart. You know, I can infer that. And then the causes that you have this body, the karmic causes, is very obscure for me, very obscure phenomena, because that's only known by a Buddha. I have no idea how you got into this rebirth. The details of karma, it's like, that's beyond the beyond for me. So let's do one example that I really enjoyed when we went through this chapter, partly because I never think we came up with any answer. But this is on page 20 and 21. This is question number 3. And we're going to just see what people think about this. And even if people online have ideas. If you've never been to Antarctica, which of the 3 categories of phenomena is Antarctica in relation to you? I quite enjoyed this. Do you remember? Okay, so is it very obscure because you have to depend on another person's testimony to know what it looks like? Or is it slightly obscure because you could see like a photograph or a 3D model so you can infer what it looks like? Or is it evident because you saw it live streamed on the internet? Okay, does anyone have any thoughts about this? Think about it. Which one? Which is it for you? What do you think? Has anyone here been to Antarctica? No. Okay. Close. Close is no cigar. Close, but no cigars. So what do you think? What do you think, Venerable Soltram? The question is Antarctica, to you who has never been there, is it an evident phenomena? Is it a slightly obscure phenomena? Because somebody showed you like a map or a model? Or is it very obscure because you have to depend on another person's testimony to even know it's there? Very obscure. Why?
Because I've never been there, so I don't know.
You've never been there, so you don't know. So it's not evident. But why can't you infer it's there? Why not? Why not? How about if I showed you a video?
Actually, I could probably infer it because I've met people who have been.
You think you could infer it because you've met people who have been there? Take a microphone and tell me what your thought would be. Why aren't they a reliable authority? To somebody that they're a reliable authority, that would be very obscure, I think. Just like the campfire thing. It's like your friend calling you from New York and telling you, hey, I'm at a campfire. Or your mom telling you when you're born. I think that's very obscure. What about the video? What do you think? Fake news. Yeah, that's where we ended up last time. What if somebody, does something to the video?
Or they turn their iPhone on and they start showing pictures of icebergs and penguins and stuff.
Right.
But the definition of an evident phenomena includes external objects. So to be an external object, doesn't that have to be in relationship to the perceiver? I mean, to have it as a virtual, that's pushing the external object experience. Like you have to be in the presence of that external object to call it an evident phenomena.
Yeah, like the campfire example.
Right. Where if you've got a video of it, you're not exactly perceiving it directly. It's
pretty good in court.
That's true.
The police cams.
But if you want to take the description pretty literally here, it does say external objects for evident phenomena.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So anyway, anybody got any other thoughts? Yes.
I suppose Sravasti Abbey is very obscure for all the people online who haven't been here, right? I mean, how do they know we actually have a monastery here, You could have a fake cardboard thing behind you, maybe.
Yeah. It was created in Disneyland. Yeah, that's an interesting one, I think. I don't have an answer to that one, but I do think it's interesting that you can use video things in court, and they'll, it's authoritative, but they probably don't answer this question either. Police camcorders, yeah. So, I mean, they are reliable. We use them. So, I don't know. It's hard. Some people really thought when we talked about this last time that a video was evident phenomena. But then that got cloudy. But for me, it's very cloudy because even if I was in Antarctica, and even if I had really no impairment, I don't know. To me, like when you look at things a lot of times, how reliable is that sometimes? You know what I mean? Sometimes you see things, I don't know. I guess if you weren't impaired in any way, you should be able to rely on that. But every once in a while, that false seems to get me into trouble. Yes?
Question from online. It says, what about hearing aids?
Yeah, right. This is where we went last time. Telescopes, microscopes, hearing aids. Exactly. Things that are amplified. Yeah, it's a tough one. Well, you are hearing, so you're directly, I think that would be evident, but you're having to augment it. So then a microscope? Well, you're there at least. I don't know, it's tough. They have a microscope now where they went under in the sea, and it can see as small as a micron, which is 1/100th of a width of a hair, and they watched coral being formed. Now, what do you think? Evident? I don't know. It gets really fuzzy after a while because you can't see that with your naked eye. And they can see actually down to an angstrom now with certain kinds of microscopes. That's amazing. They can watch. That blows my mind. That's really small. That's like chemical reactions, watching chemical reactions happen or something. Okay, so that's where we got with that one. Let's move on. Yes. Okay. You have a microphone?
Got a microphone.
Use it
We say,
so that people can
I
hear
would
you.
say very obscure because we needed a world map to know about Antarctica's existence. And the second one was, without the testimony of another, I could never have reasoned that Antarctica exists. And without testimony, I would not be able to reason out that a video is of Antarctica.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, you win. I like that one. I think that's the most reasoned answer yet. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's good. We'll call it good. Okay, we're moving on to the 7 types of awarenesses. And now you've got your little sheet. I think you're on page 2. So in the monastic universities in old Tibet and now in India, wherever, they taught the topic of reliable cognizers by introducing these 7 types of awareness. And these are taught from the Satantrika point of view. And not all of the 7 are reliable cognizers, but this is how they introduce the topic. Some of them are and some aren't. So let's review what these 7 types of awarenesses are. And this is, we'll start with direct perceivers. Well, I'll list them first. There's direct perceivers, inferential cognizers, subsequent cognizer, correct assumption, inattentive awareness, deluded doubt, and wrong awareness. And as you might remember, usually you start at a wrong awareness and you work your way all the way up through a lot of those, maybe not all of them, but not necessarily an inattentive awareness, but basically you kind of work up to these ones that are more reliable. So let's see what they are. So let's start with the direct perceiver. There's 2 things on this chart that match. F, okay. An awareness that knows its object directly without a conceptual appearance of its observed object. Yeah, right. A direct perceiver does not have a conceptual appearance or a generic image. It sees its object directly. What else? There's one more. C. Yes, a visual consciousness of dew drops on green grass. Okay, how about an inferential cognizer? There's 2. J, right. An awareness that correctly understands its observed object through a conceptual appearance, a mental image of the object, and by means of an inference. And there's an example. Right. K. The conceptual consciousness realizing subtle impermanence generated as the culmination of a process of reasoning, which was produced in dependence on a correct sign acting as its basis, sign or reason. Okay, that's right. Now we're going to subsequent cognizer, and this one has 3. D, right. The second moment onward of a sense, this is an example of a subsequent cognizer. The second moment onward of a sense, direct, reliable cognizer of blue. So you have a direct sense, you're seeing blue with your eye consciousness. You have a sense, reliable cognizer of blue. The next moment, you have a subsequent cognizer of that. There's 2 more, an example and P, right. An awareness that realizes an existent object that has already been realized. It's the second moment onward following a conceptual or non-conceptual reliable cognizer. And there's another example. That's not a subsequent. P. That's a subsequent cognizer. I'm on subsequent cognizer. And O, someone said O. Yeah, there were 3. So another example of a subsequent cognizer was the second moment onward of an inferential reliable cognizer, realizing the emptiness of the person. So there you can see that there are both conceptual and non-conceptual subsequent cognizers. Whereas like the direct perceiver, completely non-conceptual. The inferential cognizer, conceptual. The subsequent cognizer, you can have either. Okay, now a correct assumption. There are 2 here. One is an example and one is more like a description. E, right. A conceptual awareness that correctly apprehends its object as a result of having read or heard an explanation of it, but does not fully or firmly grasp the meaning or conclusively ascertain its object. So you've read something, you get it at that moment, you're understanding it correctly. But it's not like you've thought about it. It's not like you really have delved into it. You could probably forget it in the next moment, actually, for briefly, but you haven't fully grasped the meaning of it. You haven't ascertained it. So it's not stable. So what's an example here? Q, right. After learning a new topic, we have a correct general idea about it. But because we don't ascertain the meaning, our understanding is not firm, and we could change our mind later. So, you could say the words and have a general idea, but you haven't really grokked it. And you haven't made it firm. And you could easily get knocked off that. And this is what Venerable always has said, that Geshe Sonam Rinchen always said to them when they would laugh at some of the non-Buddhist schools. And actually, a lot of the stuff we're learning comes from these non-Buddhist schools about reliable cognizers, which we'll see later on. But if you had somebody who was really could explain things in a real clear way, you might adopt some of those ideas that could be wrong. He always really, she's told us that story many times. So that's where you can get knocked off these things because you really haven't delved into them. Okay, the next one is an inattentive awareness. This has 2. H, right. A direct perceiver to which its apprehended object clearly appears but is not ascertained. Okay, and there's an example. What's that? In, right. While engrossed in watching a movie, our auditory consciousness hears the voices of people near us, but later we cannot say with certainty that people were speaking or what they were discussing. Because our eye consciousness, and we're focused on one thing and we kind of like, yeah, but we're not really attending. It's inattentive. You might be able to say, I heard something. Okay, now we're moving on to deluded doubt, and there are 2. A, right. An awareness that vacillates between 2 or more options and is inclined toward the wrong conclusion. Exactly. Not something that's going to help you in the long run. And an example. L, right. A mind that wonders whether or not future lives exist and thinks that probably they do not. It's the mind inclined towards the wrong conclusion. But you're not, you're just not, you haven't decided. Whereas now we go to a wrong awareness. This has 4 items, 3 examples and 1 description. Okay, we'll start with G. Either a conceptual or non-conceptual consciousness that incorrectly apprehends its observed object. Okay, let me say that again. Either a conceptual or non-conceptual consciousness that incorrectly apprehends its observed object. So, what's there some examples? Okay, I heard B. B, example, holding the view that impermanent things are permanent. Yeah, you may have something appearing to your mind, but actually what your mind is getting at is wrong, essentially. What's another one? M, a hallucination hearing voices where there are none. That's clear. So you actually, something is happening in the mind, something is appearing to the mind, but its actual observed object is a wrong awareness, because you're hearing something, but there actually aren't any voices there. Have you ever had that experience? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, there's one more. I, okay. Holding the view that what is foul is actually delightful. I've had that experience a lot, because I used to go to anatomy labs when I was in graduate school, and I'd ride my bike there at 7:30 in the morning, and I was barely awake, even though it was kind of a long ride, and I'd get in there and it's like 7:30 and there's these cadavers and a part would fall on the floor, and I was just so grossed out. But then I would walk out that door and be attracted to somebody. Like, all those anatomy labs never taught me anything about foulness of the body, really. And I was around these cadavers for a lot of hours, and I never got it. It was like, it's just wrong awareness. Okay, so now we're going on to a little bit about, so we've talked a little bit about some of these characteristics of reliable and unreliable awarenesses. So we have to try to understand that not all of our cognitions are reliable. As we can see from the examples that we went through, we have these experiences that aren't reliable. So we have to try to figure out these in our own experience. We have to identify these things so that we can figure out, should I trust what I'm seeing? Should I trust what I'm thinking? Even with seeing, like that experience where you think you're moving but you aren't. When something moves past you, that's not reliable, and you're seeing it and thinking. Of course, we all know that one. So there actually are 2. So we have to figure this out, and there's 2 main explanations about this topic of reliable cognizers, or pramana. Pramana is what the Sanskrit word for reliable cognizer. So one system is from Dharmakirti, and one is from Chandrakirti. Dharmakirti wrote from the Sautrantika and Chittamatra perspective, and Chandrakirti taught from the Prasangika Madhyamaka perspective. And they define the word pramana differently. So for Dharmakirti, a pramana, or a reliable cognizer, is a prime cognizer. It's new and non-deceptive knower. So new, the word of pramana, is taken as new, so they translate this as prime cognizer often. New indicates that it's the first moment of a non-deceptive cognizer. So that's, for Dharmakirti, the first moment is the prime cognizer, and the subsequent moments in the same continuity, knowing the same object, these are subsequent cognizer. And for Dharmakirti, these are not prime, they're not reliable. And so Dharmakirti, a proponent who spoke what we now call Sautrantika, for this, for Satantrika, these prime cognizers are not considered reliable cognizers. Why? Because reliable cognizers or prime cognizers, they know an object under their own power, whereas a subsequent cognizer doesn't know the object under its own power. It knows it by the force of the prime cognizer, the previous moment. So that's their take on this. And I remember when Guy was here, he talked about this a lot from the viewpoint of a meditator. I think that the idea that I recall him saying was like, kind of like the freshness of the first moment. It has quite a lot of impact. And you could kind of understand that when you think about, when you think about it. But Chandrakirti saw this differently. For him, pramana is a knower that is non-deceptive with regard to its principle or apprehended object. So they both have non-deceptive, but Chandrakirti doesn't have the requirement of new. That's because the pra of pramana, he doesn't translate that as new. He uses valid or right or main. And so for them, the subsequent cognizer is a pramana because it's actually, the cognition is valid with respect to its main object. The moment before you had a reliable cognition, you still have that same object as the main object. And so for them, they are reliable cognizers because they have the same apprehended object as the moment right before. So that's how he sees this. Does that make sense? It's not that hard in a way. We have to go back to the main thing. The main thing is like for Satantrika, the prime cognizer, it knows it under its own power. But that doesn't, for Chandrakirti, that wasn't the big deal for him because, hey, it's the same object, you're apprehending the same things. For him, that's good enough for me. It's reliable. Okay, so for both of them, they both have non-deceptive. And what does that mean? It means incontrovertible. This knower is trustworthy and knows its object correctly. So then from that perspective, if you look at like Dharmakirti, who presented these 7 types of awarenesses that we went through, he would say that 2 of those 7 are reliable. He would say the direct reliable cognizer and the inferential reliable cognizer. So the first 2, direct and inferential. For him, those are the ones that are pramana. And then one thing he does, which I think I wanted to kind of focus on tonight, were inferential reliable cognizers, because I found this topic interesting, especially at the very end of the chapter. But you have to review a lot to get there, and we might not get there. Let's see what time we started. We started at 7:15, so we go to 8:15 or 8:30, somewhere in there. Okay, we might get there, we might not. We'll see. Anyway, so for Dharmakirti, when he talked about inferential reliable cognizers, he broke it into 3 types. Factual inferential cognizer, which we sometimes have called inference by the power of the fact, because there's different translations. And then the second one for him was inferential cognizers based on renown. And I like to say renown in the world because it helps me remember what that is a little better. And the third one was inferential cognizers based on belief. And so that's the one. So I'm going to give the definitions of these. And I think what I came out from this with was a much clearer understanding of what Dharmakirti and Satantrika think and what Chandrakirti thinks, so that I got really confused on when we went through this when she first taught it. But a few things helped me out here. So it was kind of seeing what do they hold in common and what didn't they and why. That was basically what it came down to. So the factual inferential cognizer, or inference by the power of the fact, the definition of that is an inferential consciousness by the power of the fact is a determinative knower which depends on its basis, a correct sign by the power of the fact, and is incontrovertible with respect to its object of comprehension. What? A slightly hidden phenomena. An illustration is the inferential consciousness realizing that sound is impermanent. So it's a determinative knower, and it depends on this correct sign. And what is it based on? It's what you're comprehending. It's the object of comprehension, which is a slightly hidden phenomena. And it's incontrovertible with respect to that. Whereas the next one, the inferential cognizer based on renown, and this is not one that Chandrakirti listed, that's actually, the object of comprehension there is more like a terminological suitability, like a suitable term. It's like we call the moon rabbit possessor, and everyone in that who did that in ancient India knew that word, and rabbit possessor was moon. So for Dharmakirti, that was that type of terminological suitability is what this is about. Renown means renowned in the world, essentially. So let me read the definition to make that more clear. A determinative knower, right, which, depending on its basis, a correct sign of renown, that's the bottom line here, a correct sign of renown, is incontrovertible with respect to its object of comprehension, which is what? A terminological suitability. As an illustration would be the inferential consciousness that realizes it's suitable to express rabbit possessor by the term moon. So it's kind of just saying these words we use that we all agree upon, you know, that is the object of comprehension here. So, and that's one that Chandrakirti doesn't list. Okay, and his third one is the inferential cognizer based on belief, which is what we described earlier as authoritative testimony, the inference based on authoritative testimony. And this was for very hidden phenomena. And this, an illustration of that would be like the scripture from Nagarjuna where he says, from giving resources, from ethics, a happy migration, is incontrovertible with respect to the meaning indicated by it. So for some person, that's going to be, they'll have an inference about this. They will get to a place where they rely on this through the scripture, something that is very obscure phenomena, and they will come to an inference where they know that. And Venerable Chodron is always a little hesitant about this one, but I actually think it makes sense to me that you could get to a place where you would know something. But I can see her hesitancy. I think her ideas make sense. Yeah, use a mic.
I'm really puzzled on this one too, but it just is just my thinking is that Dharmakirti spends the entire second chapter with a zillion proofs about why the Buddha is a reliable being.
Right.
Realizing that on that basis, then it seems to me that the inferential cognizer based on belief, if you have that realization and followed all the logic to
yes.
take the Buddha as that reliable being, then the authority is unquestionable.
Right, I agree. And that's why in this chapter, which we aren't going into tonight, they talk about the 3 ways of looking at scripture for evident, slightly obscure, and very obscure phenomena, because they have criteria that you need to satisfy to make that happen. And so, as Venerable has said many times, the Buddha knew what he was talking about. And because you can rely on the things that you can grok, you can kind of, like explore the possibility at the minimum that maybe some of this other stuff holds true too, even though you don't know it yet. And that's where we need to have some, I think, faith based on reasoning to move forward so that we can generate wisdom. If you don't have any faith, as Nagarjuna says, you just can't get anywhere. Faith is first, but wisdom is foremost, or something like that, is the meaning of what he says. Yeah, so anyway, those are interesting, I think, to think about, because this is the level that we're working at for a lot of things. So understanding inference is important. So, okay, of those 7 consciousnesses, those first 2 were reliable, but for Dharmakirti, the wrong consciousness, the doubt, the subsequent cognition, the correctly assuming consciousness, and the inattentive consciousness, none of those were considered pramana or reliable. Cannot be trusted. And that's really something to think about. And Venerable asks a lot of questions here that I think is worth doing, like, why not? And if you read the chapter, she gives a lot of examples. So I would spend more time with that. But I'm going to move on to Chandrakirti's 4 types of reliable cognizers, because this is where I got kind of confused last time, and it makes more sense to me. And I think the footnote helped me the most. In the footnote around this chapter had to do with the fact that these 4 that he mentions were actually things that were held by non-Buddhist schools. So this predated him, essentially, or was these concurrent? I don't know. But in ancient India, both Buddhist and non-Buddhist schools accepted these. So for instance, the Vaisheshika school, which is a non-Buddhist school, they already accepted direct perceivers and inferential cognizers as reliable. And then the Samkhya's added to that reliable cognizers depending on scripture. And then the Nyaya school added reliable cognizer using an example or an analogy. So let's list first. Now you need to look at your chart. I think this is on the bottom of page 1 on the handout. This is a chart from Venerable's book, from this chapter, of the reliable cognizers and unreliable cognizers according to Chandrakirti on page 26. And on the left side, it has the reliable cognizers. Basically, he has 4, right? And they boil down to 2, direct, reliable cognizers, and inferential. But he splits out the inferential. So he comes up with a list of 4, which is what they had in these non-Buddhist schools and early Buddhist schools as well, apparently. And then one thing that he does is, under the direct reliable cognizers, which you don't have on your chart, but I have on mine, because I'm up here, and I have to have the footnotes, is that a direct reliable cognizer for Chandrakirti also includes the subsequent cognizers, and that we'll talk about. And so, and the unreliable ones, he's the same as Dharmakirti, except for one. The subsequent cognizers is where they differ in one way. So for the unreliable ones, just like Dharmakirti, wrong awarenesses and deluded doubt and inattentive awarenesses and correct assumptions are all unreliable for both of them. But when you go to the reliable ones, Dharmakirti did not have reliable, number 3, reliable cognizers based on an example. So this is, and remember he had one based on renown and the other 2 were the same. So that's where they had some differences. And so we'll go through these a little bit. That chart will be helpful still. So we're on the direct reliable cognizers on that chart by Chandrakirti. That here. So this is where the words get funny. Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit already. These are cognizers that know their objects that are evident phenomena, as we've said. They know them directly. They know them non-deceptively. And for Chandrakirti, they're not depending on a reason or a logical mark. So this is where a big difference is. For Satantrika, the direct, indirect perceiver means without a conceptual appearance. But that's not what it means for the Prasangika. The direct, indirect perceiver means not relying on a reason for them. So this is one of the main differences. So that's, if you can kind of remember that, direct perceiver for Satantrika means no conceptual appearance. Direct perceiver for Prasangika means not relying on a reason. So, for an example of a direct reliable cognizer, as we said, if we have an unimpaired eye faculty, we can see blue. We will have a non-conceptual, direct, reliable cognizer. And another example would be, and this is now just for Prasangika, the subsequent cognizer is also a direct, reliable cognizer. So, for instance, a consciousness correctly remembering a conversation we had yesterday. Okay? So they call that direct. It's a direct, reliable cognizer, even though it's a conceptual memory of the conversation. So remember, subsequent cognizers can be conceptual and non-conceptual. But for Prasangika, they are direct. Why? Because it's not relying on a reason. So it's a direct, reliable cognizer. I'm taking these words right out of her book. I cut and paste everything. I'm not making any of this up. I'm just explaining it. And I have different colors for things so I can keep track of things. So yeah, and that when you go back to where they differ, it all makes sense. You can call it direct. Why? Because it's not relying on a reason. It doesn't matter that it has a conceptual appearance. It can still be called direct because it's not relying on a reason. Why? Because it's a subsequent cognizer. The cognizer before it was the one that was conceptual. Yeah, it might have been conceptual. Well, it might not have been. If you had a conversation, you were hearing it. It could have been direct. But then you're remembering it, and that's conceptual. But because it's a subsequent cognizer and it follows that, it's by the power of the previous one. It doesn't have to be under its own power. Why? Because you're not a Satantrika now. You're wearing your Prasangrika hat. You're not relying on a reason. So you're good. You can call it direct. It doesn't have to, because we're not talking about inferences. We're talking about direct, reliable cognizers. Yeah. Well, I don't know if I can answer, but you can ask.
So if you're remembering the conversation you had yesterday, and you call that memory of a conversation that you did have a direct, reliable cognizer of in that moment is still a direct, reliable cognizer because you're recalling it now. But the person that you had the conversation with has a completely different memory of that conversation. Also, presumably having a direct, reliable cognizer. How do we deal with...
Well, you have to have unimpaired. So there's got to be something, these things have to be unimpaired.
I mean...
Correctly remembering a conversation. Yeah, this is where I think it gets fuzzy. This
right.
is when we started this conversation.
The memory part is the problem. I mean...
Yeah. Well, it has to be correct. Correctly remembering a conversation. Yeah.
Right, but who validates or who...
Well, this is where it gets tough.
Incontrovertibility.
This is where people disagree about everything. And even with the video cameras, because you have a different angle, this is where it gets a little fuzzy. This is why somebody has to go to court and show it from different angles. Go ahead. Give her a mic. Not everyone agrees with this.
There's a great African proverb that says there's three sides to every story. There's your side, my side, and then there's the truth.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, let's go on. Another example of this direct, reliable cognizer, according to Chandakirti, is, and many scholars would agree, not all, that the second moment onward of an inferential cognizer realizing impermanence. An inferential cognizer. So now that's got a conceptual appearance to it because it's inferential, right? And it's realizing impermanence. But the subsequent moment, the second moment of that, is a direct, reliable cognizer because the first moment of that inferential, unlike the first moment, it's not relying on a reason. It comes down to the same thing. So it is a direct, reliable cognizer, but it doesn't directly apprehend. That's where the words get screwed up, and I don't want to spend too much time on that. To directly apprehend something, it has to be non-conceptual. So you have to be careful. It's a conceptual consciousness, so it doesn't directly apprehend. But it is a direct, reliable cognizer. And that's how the language goes, my friends. That's a cut and paste. And that's where we always get mixed up on this. But we've heard this at least 5 times since I've lived here. So we have to start learning it. Maybe by the 6th or 7th, I don't know. Okay, so that was the general topic of direct, reliable cognizers. Okay, so then there's all these other ones under here where he breaks it down, sense ones, mental ones, and yogic direct perceivers. And some examples, sense ones we know, but some examples of mental direct, reliable cognizers are like clairvoyance, or even the consciousness that knows our feelings of happiness and pain. And then the direct one, this is what we want to go to. This is where we have to have the unity of serenity and insight, a union of serenity and insight, which is and we place that on something that is meaningful, like the Four Noble Truths, or the 16 attributes of the Four Noble Truths, or emptiness, and we realize it directly. This is how we overcome our defilements. But I'm not spending much time on that. I'm more interested in the inferences. So So the second one we've talked about already that Chandrakirti had. We're now on the chart, back to the chart, number 2, inferential reliable cognizers. We've talked about those pretty much. An example would be a syllogism. Consider the person. She does not exist as a permanent, partless, under its own power, soul or self, because she depends on her body and mind. So if you know that the person depends on her body and mind, I think we know that, then you can, that's the reason, that it depends on her body and mind, and the person is the subject, then you can come to the place where you understand this thesis at some point. Consider a person, she does not exist as a permanent, partless, under its own power, soul or self, because. So you can get to the place where you actually know that incontrovertibly with the inferential reliable cognizer, which is slightly obscure. So you need to have reasoning. And then the third one, which is, to me, super interesting. It's the reliable, this was one that Dharmakirti didn't have, but this is what I feel like most of my education was in science-related stuff, which I had a lot of, physical therapy, any of that stuff, was reliable cognizers based on an example. They realize their objects, which are slightly obscure phenomena, by understanding something that's similar. So it's like you have a model. I've read so many books with diagrams and pictures and this, how the atoms are working, I was a physiology major, how everything is working, what the anatomy is even, pictures, diagrams. And so you have these diagrams that are giving you some information that's similar to what really is there. Now, if you're a surgeon, it's pretty direct. But if you're not a surgeon and you're dealing with people's anatomy, I'm not cutting them open, but I know these things from books and diagrams and pictures and blah, blah, blah. So all those are reliable based on an example. And this was really strong for me once when I realized that I completely believed, like 12, 13 years ago, I remember thinking this. I completely believe in the muscle contraction theory. Completely believe in that theory. But I've never seen any of it happen. Zero. I learned this all from books and diagrams, and I had to learn that a lot of times. It's a big test question. They test you on all the molecules and all of this and that. And then you work in a job where you're working with people's muscles, and they're spastic, and they're flaccid, and they're paralyzed, and they're weak and strong, and this and that, and spasms, and whatever it is. And they take muscle relaxers, and they feel this way, and they don't take muscle relaxers, and they feel that way. And there's just all these tangible stuff. And then you have this theory. And I realized I completely believe that. And that is something that I never saw. And I completely believe it. And it's based on this. Since, there's similar characteristics of the model or the diagram or whatever. And for actually in India, I think the Buddha told this king to give this other king a gift. He had to give him something really valuable, and he didn't have anything right. I don't know. Somehow he asked the Buddha, and that's how this happened, where a king was given a painting of the Wheel of Life, with the 12 links and all that. And it shows the different classes of beings and everything. And from that, it shows how you take rebirth, right? And from that picture alone, this king understood dependent arising. And then from that, he actually had an understanding of the lack of inherent existence, according to our book. As the Venerable said, I wasn't there. I'm taking this one on testimony. But we're always told about the thing with the reflection in the mirror. This is another one by example where, here's like this. A face in a mirror is evident, right? But emptiness is slightly obscure. But we use this example, something evident, to get to something slightly obscure. So when an intelligent disciple whose mind stream is fully ripened, a lot of these inferences, they don't come out of nowhere. They're based on a person having a lot of background. We have the Buddhist worldview. We study the Lam Rim. We place all these things in this context, and then we're given these things to think about. And so for that one, just as a face in a mirror lacks true existence, so does the person. And this is a power of the example. And this is where the context really matters, because she uses an example about one about death, and I'm thinking, yeah, think, something like the person dies because they are born. That was the syllogism in this chapter. And I'm like, and that's going to lead the person to think about rebirth and getting out of cyclic existence. I'm like, well, not most of the people I know. It's like the person dies because they are born. Well, I know a person is born, so the reason I've got, and I probably am going to figure out that I'm going to die, but it's not necessarily going to make me think about getting out of cyclic existence. So this is where, to be a qualified disciple, to be a suitable subject for what we're trying to learn from these things are in a context, right? And that's one of the points in this chapter. Okay, so we're running out of time, so I want to go to the very end to, the last one is the reliable cognizers based on authoritative testimony, which we've kind of covered already. There wasn't anything really new in there. And then we all know enough about syllogisms to understand the language of syllogism. So I want to go to the very end near the end of the book. I don't remember what page this is, but it's a part called Inferential Reliable Cognizers in Meditation. And I found this really interesting because she talks about the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And you have to have all this terminology and understanding for this to kind of make any sense, really. But okay, the topic here is inferential reliable cognizers in meditation. So we have so many people that, where what they're writing here, what His Holiness is writing here, what Chodron are writing here is like the pushback. We're pushing back against people who think that analytical meditation is not experiential. That's what's happening here. And so, okay, so she starts by explaining, or His Holiness, that we have these 2 basic kinds of meditation. We have stabilizing meditation and analytical meditation, or serenity and insight. And a lot of people don't get that inference is not just mere intellectualness, like discursive thought or something. It is related. What it leads you to is an experience-based insight. That's the point. And so, actually, these kind of factual inferences can have a very profound effect on our mind, as Jeffrey has said many times. We can totally change our outlook on things. Think about these things that all these things that we've learned already, that non-dharma related, where we're doing this by inference, and we have totally affected our lives by these kind of things, in your careers and your daily life, whatever. So that's important to understand. And then what I really liked is that she talked about this, that we don't even have to consciously state a syllogism. That's where she talks about the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So we are using a factual inference and developing insight through analytical meditation, and we're not necessarily stating a syllogism to ourselves. For instance, when we establish mindfulness on the body, we aren't necessarily saying at the beginning of that meditation, the body is unattractive because it's composed of unappealing parts. Okay, we can see when we look at the 32 parts that these are kind of unappealing. We get the body has unappealing parts, but we don't get that it's unattractive. Bhikkhu Bodhi really made this really clear. It was so funny. Many years ago, he said, think of someone you're attracted to. Okay, so he was talking about a guy he mentioned like a Miss America or something, whatever. Think of someone you're attracted to. You see them, they're attractive, right? Now, tear them apart and put all their parts all over the place, and it's like everything about those parts is gross. The blood, the this, the that, the organs, the skin is like peeled off, the eyeballs are tossed over there. It all it's kind of unattractive. But as soon as you snap that back together, boom, they're attractive again. And I was like, yeah, true. That's how it works. So we have to kind of bust through this kind of, one of these distortions that we have. And we don't necessarily do this in that meditation by stating the syllogism to ourselves. We actually just look at the parts with strong mindfulness, and of course we're steeped and marinated in the Buddhist worldview, and we naturally come to see that it's unattractive. Why? Because it's composed of all these unattractive things. And so this can be an inference that has a very strong effect on your mind. And it will affect how you relate with others. It might even lead you out of cyclic existence, and you haven't necessarily stated yourself a syllogism. Same thing with feelings. Like the syllogism, consider feelings, they are dukkha, unsatisfactory in nature, because they are under the control of afflictions and karma. So if you meditate on Four Establishments of Mindfulness, and you meditate on feelings, you just start to see, you'll start to see this, that, wow, these are under the control of afflictions and karma. They're just like coming, going, coming, going, coming, going. It's like, it just is crazy. And the fact that they don't stay is really a drag when they're pleasant. And, it's just, so this will come to you. It will lead you to that there's no purpose to cling to these things. They're just coming, going, and like they're just popping up. And and so not to be so identified with them and so attached to them, because they're just so transient. Like the thing with the bubbles of water, that's what they say, that the analogy is feelings are like water drops making these bubbles, and the bubble from drops of rain are so transient, and that's how our feelings are. If you watch them, they're hard. They don't stay. So why be so clinging to them? And that's what it goes on to. And then in the end of the chapter, she takes the same kind of idea and applies it to Lam Rim topics. So your homework, to end tonight, we're just going to give people homework, is to think about one of these two questions from everything we studied tonight. What kind of reliable cognizers know the dukkha of cyclic existence? And think about the three kinds of dukkha and which kind of cognizers. And then think about this second question. These are from her book. When you reflect on the kindness of others, what kind of reliable cognizers are at play? And think about that. I think these are really, once we've got some grasp on this, we can think about these things and then really bring them into our experience and see, how we're functioning. And then just to know that some other main topics in this chapter, we didn't cover a lot of things, but she kind of lists one section called Pasangka's Unique View of Reliable Cognizers. It had 6 points. She didn't number them, but there's 6 points, and we talked about a few of those. And that's very interesting, because one focus of tonight was to kind of do this contrasting Dharmakirti and Chandrakirti, or Satantrika and Prasangika. And then another thing that's in the chapter is, explaining about syllogisms and the different parts of syllogisms, and also about scriptural authority, how to, look at the three things that you have to look at to see if a scripture is reliable based on the kind of objects that it's describing, phenomena that it's describing. So there's a lot more in there. But I think that these were the main points that made everything understandable. And then you can just go back to it from there. Okay, no time for questions. Send your comments. You're welcome. Yeah, I had to sort that out because I was so confused when we went through this last time. 2018, lost. And it helped to read this footnotes, I have to say, to understand that Chandrakirti was just in a milieu where these were what people were talking about, and why they thought about it differently. Well, who knows? They have different ideas. Okay, so back to where we started, we need to figure out what to adopt and what to abandon. So let's take our merit of thinking about this topic and dedicate it for our full awakening, so that we can actually, step by step, rely on our qualified teachers all the way to full awakening, so that we can actually benefit beings and remove every being from every kind of suffering. So much going on in the world now, so evident, and various creatures, human, non-human, we need to really dedicate for full awakening, so that we don't lose anything that we're putting into our mind stream. We need this to carry forward in a big way.